Hi everyone. Thank you, Katie and Cass, for accepting to give a talk in the Geotheroom platform. So we're going to start our session with Catherine Hickson. So Dr. Catherine Hickson is a geologist and a senior executive who has been involved in geothermal industry for more than 40 years. Starting as a student running temperature logs in gradient wells, she then went on to finish her PhD at UBC, investigating the Wells Gray Clearwater volcanic field and its potential for geothermal energy. She then became a research scientist with the Geological Survey of Canada and was head of its Cordilleran office in Vancouver for 7 years. While at the Geological Survey, she continued working on projects that tied together geothermal energy and volcanology. In 2008, she left the Geological Survey to join a pure-play geothermal company as VP Exploration. Since then, she has been working globally on projects over 14 countries, overseeing all facets of the industry, from greenfield exploration projects to reservoir modeling and injection strategies, to raising funds for development companies. She joined Geothermal Canada, then the Canadian Geothermal Association in 1981, and has continued to participate in the association for the past 40 years, serving several stints on the board of directors. She currently served as its president. Catherine is CEO of Alberta No. 1 and Chief Geoscientist for Terrapin Geothermics. She's also president of Tuyaterra Geocorp, maintaining a global geothermal practice. So, Catherine, it's up to you now.
Jim and Paul, it's a bit long. But anyway, thank you so much for those kind introduction. So what I'm going to be doing first is just giving everybody a little bit of background in terms of Geothermal Canada. We're actually the world's second oldest geothermal association, having been founded 2 years after what is now called Geothermal Rising, which is the US. So I'm going to share my screen, and yes, and first of all, welcome everybody from across the world, and see if we can make this work. All right. So, do you see a single screen that has an elephant sitting in it? Okay, super. So, as I probably said, I've been in this industry for more than 40 years, and there's actually very few of us that have had that kind of longevity. And partly that's a little bit of the nature of the business. But what we're seeing right now, and what I'm going to be speaking to, is just this huge increase. Increase in interest. So let me, okay. So Geothermal Canada, as Paul said, was founded in 1974. We changed our name in 2018 to Geothermal. Oops, and now we're on the automatic. Emily, I forgot about this. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Sorry. Before I go on, though, what I'd like to do is introduce Cass and Mafalda and Emily, who are all on the current board of Geothermal Canada. And I just saw Gord, I think, come on. So Gord is also on our board. And what we are trying to do is, when we rebranded, we also changed our directorship structure in order to make sure that there's representation from across Canada. So one of the things that you should note, though, is that date, that start date, 1974. what that indicates is that Canadian scientists, Canadian researchers, and Canadian companies have been involved in geothermal around the world. The other thing I want people to note is, and it's going to come up on the next slide, is that we actually produced power here in Canada more than a decade, 2 decades ago, back in 1984. And actually, it's more than 2 decades. And so we do have an amazing resource, and that's really what we're going to be talking to you about, myself and Cass and others over the next hour or so, is what that resource looks like and how we're going through the development. So let me stop this slideshow and close that window. And now I'll put on my other hat, which is CEO of Alberta Number One. Okay, do we have slides? Do we have a single slide? Alberta Number One? Okay.
Yes, we have.
Super, thank you. And we are a corporation, so that's why there is a disclaimer. And we, as most companies, are looking for investment. So this is a disclaimer that we in Canada need to have in front of presentations, which are talk about projects and talk about projects in a way that there may or may not be investment decisions that are made. So that's what this is all about. It has to do with companies that are seeking or are on the seeking capital investment or are on a stock exchange. So there's my elephant in the room. And the perspective that I have is, having been in this industry for so long, it has ebbed and flowed. And it has ebbed and flowed largely as a result of the price of hydrocarbons. But what we're seeing now in the last, and I would call it literally the last 2 years, last 3 years, is a complete change from that hydrocarbon base to, in fact, a basis for geothermal development that is related more to greenhouse gas reduction and ESGs. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. So geothermal really is one of the ways that the world can reduce its greenhouse gas emissions, and Alberta in particular. So one of the interesting things about being in Alberta is that most of the province is this enormous part of the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. So the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin is where all of those hydrocarbons, oil and gas, comes out of. And Alberta is the #1 province or territory that is a major producer of hydrocarbons. And if we look at hydrocarbons from a little bit different perspective, we know that there's significant natural gas. And in fact, that natural gas can be used for clean burning. But that natural gas has a very significant, it's a significant commodity with a very high value. So what I like to tell people is that why in a province like Alberta, with such an enormous resource of natural gas, why are we burning it for low temperature for low temperature thermal? So one of the big things that needs to change in terms of the thinking about geothermal is the value of thermal energy. So Alberta has this significant resource. You can see the red area obviously is the highest potential, but it's also very deep, which I'll talk about in a moment. But you can see, comparing these three images, that in fact there is more geothermal resource as a renewable than there is wind and there is solar energy. So geothermal really is something that the province of Alberta should be pursuing. And it should be pursuing it for a number of reasons. So we're talking about greenhouse gas reduction, in particular for thermal energy, district heating, space heating. That is where over 55% of Canada's energy burning, energy consumption goes to. So these are the foundations that people, investors and developers should be looking at for essentially accelerating our geothermal development. So the other thing about geothermal energy as opposed to the other renewables is we don't need battery storage. It is base load. It operates basically 24/7, 365 days. There is a slight downtime that might be a couple of percent, but compared with wind and solar, it just doesn't even make it. So in the Alberta context and in many contexts around the world, to make a project happen, we need to have other values. And those values I've put together as this holistic value chain. So in a commercial operation, we need to make money. Everybody wants to make money. Everybody needs to understand that that money, however that money might be used, either goes back into the community or goes back into the system. But in Alberta, it's very hard because of our stiff competition from natural gas to have projects which are competitive with other energy projects. And so what I've done here is I've just tried to put forward that geothermal, and it doesn't matter whether it's Alberta or Colombia or any place else in the world, it has a multiplicity of values that can be added to help basically help a development move forward. So if we happen to be in hydrocarbons, we can separate those hydrocarbons. And in fact, Terrapin Geothermics is working with a couple of companies in South America to look at how to produce power and thermal energy from their producing oil fields. So we've got that hydrocarbon separation. We can, and most geothermal projects, as long as they're not in the far north, are actually adding solar thermal as just a little bit of a boost. We can do power generation. We can do obviously space heating, direct use. That's a heat exchanger. A hot topic right now in many jurisdictions, including here in Canada and in the southern US, is lithium extraction. And then one of the things that we're working on in our project is carbon sequestration. So taking those all together, what we have is a very robust project that has, a very good, not necessarily, we're a little bit early for looking at return on investment, but we've got a very good economic basis for a project. So our project will result in 41,000 metric tons of carbon offset. The heat sales are going to be significant, and it will generate over 80,000 megawatt hours of thermal or of emission-free electricity. So let's actually look at the project itself. So we are in Alberta. So you can see here, there's Alberta and map of Canada. Blow it out here. Here's Alberta, and we're up here in this corner of the world. We're close to the city of Grand Prairie. So this is the third largest city in Alberta. So it's still not very big, but our population in Canada is very small and very dispersed. It's actually one of our major hurdles for things like district heating. But we are south of the city of Grand Prairie, and we've got several land positions. But the important thing is that those land positions are close to industrial parks. So one is called the Greenview Industrial Gateway, and the other is called the Grovedale Light Industrial Park. So the proximity of our projects to these industrial parks also adds a significant economic boost. We have built-in customers, or will have. These eco-industrial centers are under development right now, but they will provide us with built-in customers for our green power as well as for our thermal energy. Grand Prairie, there's actually a railway that goes through here, and that railway, you can take products all the way down to Mexico, and so that's called the CanMex corridor, and it's a very important economic corridor for Canada, as well as the US and Mexico, shipping goods back and forth. Some of those goods being hydrocarbons, but what we're envisioning is other kinds of goods that will be using that geothermal energy. So this industrial gateway, as most industrial complexes that are planned, it needs a green marketing image. Now in the world, it's very hard to obtain financing through banks or other lending institutions or private investors without a green image, particularly if you're in the heart of the hydrocarbon world. You need some way to, in fact, highlight and make your industrial park different from those around it. So this is I think something that all or any developer who is interested in developing geothermal energy needs to look at, is proximity to a complex that needs green energy and green thermal energy. So we're no different. We've got the Greenview Industrial Gateway, so they need a green marketing image. They need carbon credits, and they also need the ability to do sequestration. So here again, so here's the city of Grand Prairie. We're just to the south here. And what you see on this map is an indication of the amount of hydrocarbon activity in this area. All of those dots, whether they're black, green or orange, are drilled wells. In fact, Alberta has over 400,000 drilled wells. And so just as an indication of the amount of hydrocarbon activity that is in this area. So for our project, you need to have temperature and high permeability. So our target is deep in section. That target is actually at a depth of between 3,500 meters and 4,000 meters. And it includes a number of formations, and those formations are listed here. And I know that not all geologists, so this is totally meaningless to you, but these formations are a sequence of limestones that have been dolomitized. They are sandstones and conglomerates that we think will have high permeability. They're also old, and in fact, the basement in this area is Precambrian, and in fact, that is our ultimate goal, is to in fact drill into the Precambrian basement. So our drilling plan is, our TV is 4,000 meters, and we're going to be setting our intermediate casing at 2,400 meters. And these are the strata that we are targeting. So those target formations are not available everywhere. And One of the challenges for doing geothermal in the province of Alberta, despite that 400,000 plus wells that have been drilled, is that those wells are not deep enough for us. And for us, I need power generation. So the wells tell us and give us a general overview of what the gradients are in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. And what you see here is a map that shows you the temperature at the top of the sedimentary basin. But it doesn't, and it also shows you depth. So the deepest temperatures are very deep. They're over 5,000 meters in the basement. And that depths over 5,000 meters are very challenging from an economic standpoint. These wells are extremely expensive and well, they're extremely expensive and very hard to make a commercial case to go after these higher temperatures, even though you can produce more power with a higher efficiency. So what we've done is we've chosen an area, and as I said, that's south of the city of Grand Prairie. And that area, we were reaching temperatures of 110 to 120 degrees C at a depth of about 4 kilometers. And again, I want to stress that we're only going this deep because we're after temperatures which are high enough for power generation. And those are the depths that we have to reach in order to get those temperatures in Alberta. As you'll hear from Cass later, they've got a much higher gradient than we do. And so their temperatures are the shallower depths. But where we are, unfortunately, it's 3,500 to 4,000 meters. So this is what some of the rocks look like. What we did is we tried as far as possible to find core from these existing wells and review that core in terms of permeability and porosity, transmissivity, and to give ourselves more confidence in fact that our basement rock, our deep subsurface will in fact flow at the rates that we hope it will flow. The Gilwood sandstone is a particularly nice one. It's quite porous, it's angular, it's very coarse, it's quartz rich, and we hope that the Gilwood will give us major flow. And I also want to make sure people understand we have not drilled yet. So we're drilling in 2023. So these are rocks from other places, and we do not have results from our specific location. The granite wash is also a particularly important, we hope, an important one. It's at the very bottom of the section. And at the very bottom of the section, it is basically a prograding delta over top of what's called Peace River Arch. And that Peace River Arch is an uplift. And when it was uplifted, it created a gravel, a very unconsolidated, loose gravel, sand and gravel over a significant area and to significant depths. So this granite wash is an important, we hope will be an important formation because it is deepest. And then the Precambrian basement. So very little is known about the Precambrian basement, but we know in other areas that the interface between the deepest section, this one, the granite wash sandstone, and the Precambrian basement is actually an erosional surface, and it has weathering. And that weathering may in fact help increase its permeability and porosity. So we're quite interested in what kind of increased or enhanced permeability we might see due to that ancient weathering at the top of the Precambrian basement. We're also in an area where the basement is faulted, and faults are also very good conduits for hot fluids. So the temperature gradients, our gradients in our area is about 26 degrees C per kilometer. You can see it's higher in some places. The area up here, which has the best gradients, and this is, again, you can actually see the BC side of the border from Rainbow Lake, when Cass speaks. It has a much higher gradient, but there you have it. That's what we have. Now we're quite confident actually in what our bottom hole temperatures are going to be, and that is because through our partnership with a couple of other companies, we have been able to log an existing well, and that existing well is actually an oil field disposal well. So it's actually a wider diameter than a typical oil and gas well. And it was idle for more than 2 years. So it is well equilibrated with its surroundings. And we were able to come up with a very nice gradient. And that gradient gave us 118 degrees C at 4,000 meters. So we're quite confident in the temperature that we're going to be reaching. What we're less confident in is what our permeability is going to be. And here is the taking that log in an existing well. This is the details. So anybody who's interested in temperature logs. The point that I want to make about this is that the temperature logging that we do in the geothermal world is quite different than what is done in the oil and gas world. We go low, slow speed down as well as up. We sit on the bottom for a period of time to make sure that we're seeing the bottom temperature. And so we collect these very data-rich logs. And those logs tell us an awful lot. They can tell us a number of things. And that's why they're very, very important in the geothermal world, because they will tell us whether we have cold inflows or hot inflows, we particularly like. They'll often tell us where the tops and the bottoms of formations are, because those are in fact can have higher permeability. So these logs are very important. And if you have the opportunity to log a well with geothermal, then this is the way you do it. And it will just give you an incredibly rich source of information about your subsurface. So the other thing, though, as I said, so we're quite confident that we have, in fact, our bottom hole temperatures will be sufficient to make power, because this is a very important diagram, and it's something that in any geothermal project you need to look at. It's temperature and flow. So what you see here is basically the geothermal temperature is given along the bottom axis, and then its potential for power production is given along the vertical axis. And that shows you that at high temperatures, up here like 200 degrees C, these are high temperature systems. They can produce, they have a very high energy enthalpy that can be produce significant amounts of power. But when you're down here, where we are in Alberta, is we're about 115 degrees C. Our generation potential per liter of water is low. And you can see that we need to produce 63 liters per second of water to generate a single megawatt. And this does not include parasitic load. So this is just a very bare bones look at it. So that is the key. And the key is very important. In order for a geothermal geothermal well or geothermal development in a low temperature field to be successful, you need to flow significant fluid. And one of the things that we've been talking to the Alberta government about is we've got these 400,000 wells. They do flow. Some of them flow fairly high temperature waters. Can in fact they be used, repurposed for geothermal? And it all comes down to this. There's many other things. But the bottom line is that in order to generate electricity from low temperature fields, you need to flow significant amounts of water, and you need to do that with large diameter pipe. So you'll see here in Alberta, the typical pipe size is 5.5 to 4.5. The water disposal wells will sometimes be as large as 7 inches in diameter. But for geothermal, to flow the kinds of flows that we need, we're looking at 95/8 or larger. So I use my elephant again. So here's the elephant, and you know that oil and gas, these are the kitty cats and the small dogs in this. What that looks like in terms of surface equipment is this. You can see the this is another well-known person in the geothermal world, Deh-Kah. He's been in it more than 50 years. And Dick is standing beside one of the wellheads in Dixie Valley in Nevada. And you can see the size of that wellhead compared with a typical sour gas well from Alberta. And also what you see here is our project. We are projecting to be flowing 300 liters per second of brine. So that's 23,000 million liters per day, or 163,000 barrels per day. So when you start talking to oil and gas people about these kinds of flows, they suddenly realize that geothermal is not oil and gas. They are very different beasts. Certainly we can learn, the geothermal world can learn a lot from the oil and gas industry, but also the oil and gas industry can learn a lot about geothermal from the geothermal industry, because it is a different beast. We have much bigger wells, much bigger downhole pumps, and it's just, the whole thing is much larger. But because of all that water, of course, there is a risk of induced seismicity. So what is the potential for induced seismicity? Because we in the geothermal world now basically do 100% reinjection. Whatever you bring to the surface has to go back down. So that 300 liters per second has got to go back down. So there's two things that happen in a geothermal well. So we need to inject into it. We need to inject into it over a long period of time, and we need to produce from it separate well. And sometimes when we drill those wells do not work very well. And by that, I mean they basically do not produce the amount of fluid that we hope that they will. And so we do wellbore stimulation. And wellbore stimulation can produce some seismicity, and we just need to be cognizant of that. There is a number of ways to do that wellbore stimulation. One of them is deflagration, which is basically putting an explosive charge down your well and blowing it apart. Not the well, but the rock around it. I've seen this work quite well. Thermal fracturing is actually the one that is used most commonly in the geothermal industry. And that's simply pumping cold water down your well over a long period of time. It's over time, what it does is, you can imagine it's hot down there. It will contract the rocks and create fractures. We can also do acid stimulation as well as hydraulic fracturing. Again, what we're trying to do is stimulate and get flow out. Acid stimulation is often done because of scaling in the wellbore once you have produced your well for a significant period of time. But of course, people don't like, there's a big environmental protest about fracking. I listened with interest, the new Prime Minister of the UK just lifted the fracking ban in the UK. And in order to be able to produce more hydrocarbons. So this is an environmental concern that we all need to be aware of in the geothermal world, because we use cold water. We don't use some of the chemical proppants and whatnot that are used in the oil and gas world. We like to refer to it as stimulation. But the biggest cause of induced seismicity is injection related. So one of the things that we have done on the Alberta #1 project is we have looked very carefully as best that we can prior to drilling is what our potential is for induced seismicity. So I was working with a student, a PhD student at the University of Waterloo, and Ali Yagabushi, and we've just published this in the Canadian Journal of Science. And what he did is basically he looked at all of the induced seismicity that is related to the oil and gas operations. So this is the disposal of these oil field brines. When oil and gas is produced to the surface, there is a significant amount in the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin fluid, and that fluid is water, and that water has to go back into the ground. So this is his work. I'm not a geophysicist. I'm not going to discuss this in any detail other than to show you the amount of induced seismicity that has occurred in the oil and gas operating areas. And so this is why it is of concern to the regulators. They do not want our 300 liters per second injection rates to produce induced seismicity. So we've taken all the information that we can based on the hydraulic fracturing that has created induced seismicity around the site. And the good thing is the conclusion that we've come to is that in our specific area, there is a low probability of creating induced seismicity. So here we are in this map, there's Grand Prairie, and we're kind of in this void area, which you can see to the south of us and to the north of us, there is significant potential for induced seismicity. So what we will be doing in order to make sure that we are not, in fact, creating this induced seismicity is when we start injections, we will have a specific protocol as to how we will deal with any potential induced seismicity. So the conclusion is basically we're in a kind of a sweet spot in the basin, and we hope that there will not be a significant a significant probability of induced seismicity. So I've already talked about our co-location with the industrial park. There we are, we're off on one corner. You can see the rail line there. The importance of carbon sequestration is going to be very important to this group, to the people that are located there. We're working with the University of Alberta. We've done a significant amount of research already. And basically what it shows is that we can do carbon sequestration along with our injection. So that gives a huge kind of boost for us in terms of the project financing, to be able to add that carbon sequestration piece along with our power production and our thermal energy, and let's not forget carbon credits. So great, thank you so much. Questions, or do you want to segue right to Cass, or?
I think we have, thank you so much, Katie. First of all, it was a very interesting presentation. And I think we have a question in the chat. Yes. So I think it was you, Daniela, that wrote the question. I don't know if you want to say. Yeah.
Yes, it's me. No, just about the value that you mentioned about the minimum flow rate that you need to produce 1 megawatts. You mentioned it was 63 liters per second. I'm not sure about the value, and if this value depends on the power plant technology. It's a binary flashing or dry seam.
Yes, absolutely. So that is at 150 degrees C, and that's binary. So that diagram that I showed you was temperature and flow rate. And so it is the theoretical power production at a specific flow rate and a specific temperature. And obviously, once you get to the higher temperatures over 170 degrees C, typically you're dealing with a flash system. And that's why you get a lot more power out of it, because you've got a lot more enthalpy in steam.
Okay, so maybe we move on to Cass' presentation, and then if there is questions at the, oh, there is one question coming up. So which method did you use to estimate the geothermal gradient?
So the geothermal gradient was work that was done largely by a professor, Jacek Majorowicz at the University of Alberta. And he basically took all of the well data. So these are DSTs and some logging that was done in the oil and gas wells, as well as heat flow measurements. So he took that and he came up with essentially those broad pictures that you saw of the gradient in Alberta. In fact, he's done all of Canada, and we're very grateful to the work that Jacek has done over the past decades. Specifically in our area, it was based on logging of a single well, but it is based on this vast, this vast information that Jacek has been working on.
Okay, thank you, Katie. So as I was saying, let's move on to Cass' presentation, and then if some of the people attending had questions, we can then ask them at the end. So the next presenter is Cass Harbottle. So Cass is a project manager responsible for the management of energy projects during planning, development, and construction. Cass is a professional engineer with a Master of Science in Sustainable Development and a Bachelor of Science in Geological Engineering. She has over a decade of energy industry experience, ranging from a background in petroleum engineering to managing projects in the renewable energy sector. She has worked alongside multiple Indigenous communities to develop community-owned clean energy projects. She has a wide range of project experience, including community consultation, construction management, technical analysis, design coordination, and community energy planning. So Cass, thank you so much for giving us a talk for us today.
Thank you for that kind introduction. I'll just get my screen share working. Can you all see that?
Yes,
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you for the introduction, and thank you, Kathy, for that great presentation and overview. Very exciting project to hear about. And I think it lends well to kind of, I'll explore a little bit more of some of the social aspects of a geothermal project in Canada as well. But I'm here today to talk to you about the Deh-Kah geothermal project. And I was meant to present with my co-producer, Jamie Capelblanc, who is from the Fort Nelson First Nation and works closely on the project, but unfortunately he wasn't able to make it today. So I will take the lead. And as mentioned, I'm a project manager and I work with the Berkeley Project Group. So today I'm going to give you a bit of an overview of what the Deh-Kah project is. And I'll orient you to where the Fort Nelson First Nation and the region is. I'll talk pretty candidly about some of our progress and challenges. You will be seeing some of the first of our well test results to date. So happy to start being able to share things. And I'll highlight some key social impact that I talked about, as well as exploring some of our geothermal cascading opportunities. So first and foremost, I think it's important to know that this is a 100% Indigenous owned clean energy project. It is owned by the Fort Nelson First Nation through their economic development arm. And this is a quote from the chief of the Fort Nelson First Nation, just exemplifying what the project means to the community, really talking about revolutionizing this northern region and creating opportunities for generations to come. All right, so getting oriented with the Deh-Kah project, I have a similar map here to the one that Kathy shared. We are also developing a project in the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. You'll see where Deh-Kah is in relation to Alberta number 1. We're a little further northwest in the province of BC, which is just to the west of the province of Alberta in Canada. And it is a higher gradient area of the Western Canadian Sedimentary Basin. So our wells aren't quite as deep, but they're still, we're still considering them pretty significantly deep wells. And the goal of our project is to develop a binary cycle geothermal power plant. We're estimating, at least initially, a target generation between 5 to 10 megawatts of electrical generation, net electrical generation. And our goal is to be operational by 2026. Beyond power generation, there are a range of direct heat use opportunities, as well as some other cascading opportunities or value-added opportunities that I will talk about. I also want to highlight that this project has received significant support in terms of funding from both the Canadian and BC provincial governments. I've listed the key funders there, and most notably through the Natural Resources Canada Emerging Renewable Power Program. And I just really want to speak to, I think, with the emerging industry in Canada in a lot of ways, although I know there's been activity going on for decades by folks like Kathy. But at this stage, it's really necessary to have that government and funding support. So wanted to highlight that. A little bit more about our reservoir setting. So this is a bit of a zoom into that area that was shown on the previous slide. We're talking about the Fort Nelson region, and more specifically, what's historically been known as the Clark Lake gas field. So we're actually targeting a geothermal development below what has been operated as a natural gas production field for many decades. Since the 60s, they've been producing gas. It's been a very abundant source of natural gas. And what's shown here are the range of gas wells, many of which have been abandoned, some of which are shut in, and there are still some that are operating. So there's a largely depleted natural gas field, although there is certainly still some gas present, and we are operating in the same field as gas operators. So it's been, I think, a really good example of the kind of parallel and overlap between hydrocarbon production and geothermal production, although certainly some important differences that Kathy alluded to. And on this map, I'll highlight just a couple things we're seeing. So all of the dots, like I mentioned, are the gas wells historically. There's over 100 in the region, which has been very, very helpful for us in understanding the reservoir setting, which is a carbonate reef sequence that we're targeting a dolomite reservoir. And this is kind of a simplified cross section looking down to a depth of about 2 kilometers, 2.4 kilometers. This is how deep we've drilled our initial test well, to a depth of 2.4 kilometers to hit that granitic basement. And we are not going further into the basement as of yet, but we are targeting that carbonate reef zone. And this star on the map here is the first geothermal well that we have drilled in 2021, and we're currently testing. As well, you'll see kind of the boundary, this pink polygon here showing generally the boundary from Respect Engineering, who's our reservoir engineering team, of the reef kind of target for the geothermal reservoir. And you'll see it's a very significant area. So we also have a permit area that's shown by the kind of the boxy yellow and beige areas, and that is our geothermal exploration permit areas, which gives Fort Nelson First Nation basically the right to explore and begin the initial stages of testing and developing the geothermal resource. we also have a little rock sample here from the Dolomite Reservoir, which you can see has demonstrates some of the vuggy porosity that we'll be relying on in the reservoir. I also just want to note, this is historically referred to as the Clark Lake project, and you may have heard of, if you pay attention to kind of Canadian geothermal news, you may have heard of the Clark Lake Geothermal Project. It has been renamed the Deh-Kah Geothermal Project, and Deh-Kah it was renamed by a member of the Fort Nelson First Nation. It's a traditional Dene, so their traditional Indigenous language naming. Okay, so to give you a sense of where we are overall, we kicked this project off in 2019, and you'll see that we jumped right into what we called phase 2, because the initial exploration work in a really significant way was already done on this project in terms of having just such an abundance of well data around us that we were able to utilize to develop geological and reservoir models and really make a kind of case for the feasibility and concept of this project, in order to dig into some of the more detailed engineering and resource analysis work that needed to be done in phase 2, which led us to phase 3, which was a drilling stage. Really, that was the main activity, is we were able to drill our first test well. However, it is a full-size geothermal production well. So not only are we using it for testing, but we plan to use it for long-term production as well. And that took place in 2021. And we are now in what we're referring to as phase 4, which began in April 2022. And this is about completing the pump testing. So really validating our understanding of the geothermal resource, answering quite a few key questions to do the detailed engineering, and put together a bankable feasibility study, including engineering and business planning, financing, permitting, environmental, a whole range of aspects of the project development plan, to secure the remaining finance on the project. So our target is to, by late 2023, to be complete this phase, and in 2024 to be ready to move forward to phase 5, which is the full well field drilling. And I will be sharing kind of a concept of what that future well field may look like. And then following that, our phase 6 will be the actual construction and commissioning of the power plant itself, as well as the resource gathering system and the power line, with a commissioning or commercial operation target date of early 2026. So this is a very busy slide, and I won't get into all the details, but what I wanted to show is how big of a team it takes to pull a project like this together, and that there's just a lot of critical pieces that need to come together. And I think a lot of opportunities beyond, the engineering and geology side that I think are important to highlight. So what you'll see here is that this project is owned by the Fort Nelson First Nation under their economic development arm. And the Barkley Project Group, we work in what we call an integrated project management team with the Deh-Kah team, which are members of the Fort Nelson First Nation. And then there's for phase 4 specifically. So this is just the current team. It will continue to expand and evolve. But currently, we have teams ranging from the financing and market analysis side to our engineering and geology teams to the actual site services work, which involves a lot of different services, as well as more of the environmental and social components that are really critical in moving the project forward. I do want to highlight the involvement of both Respec Engineering, who serves as the geological modeling and reservoir engineering team, as well as Remedy Energy, who has led the efforts for the well engineering and drilling and testing operations of our first well. Okay, so a little bit about the Fort Nelson First Nation and really the region. So as mentioned, this project is located in northeastern BC. So That's quite far north in Canada, certainly a colder climate and a relatively small and remote community. The Fort Nelson First Nation is in Treaty 8 territory and in the northern Rocky Mountain region. And the potential for geothermal and what it brings to a northern community is a really exciting aspect of this project development. Okay, so again, another just an image of the Fort Nelson First Nation in the winter season. You can see the snow on the ground and the ice over the river and lake. Yeah, just showing you kind of the northern region, and you can see kind of in the distance, you're looking over the Clark Lake field, the natural gas development in the area, the footprint of that, and we're working to reuse as much of the existing footprint as we can to minimize the footprint of our project. This Reaching for Our Vision is a living document from the Fort Nelson First Nation of what the community's goals are in the region, and this project is well aligned to their goals, which is why they've chosen to develop their clean energy resource. Another important aspect of Fort Nelson and its uniqueness in BC. On the right here, I have a map from BC Hydro, which is the electrical utility in the province of BC. And what it shows is the transmission line network throughout BC. And you'll see that generally all of BC most of BC is connected. That includes connections through Alberta and to the south. Up here is where Fort Nelson is, and they are unique in that they are not connected to the rest of the transmission network. They're in what's called a non-integrated area. And why that's important is this area relies on the BC side solely on natural gas fired power generation, which is what this image is showing. The plant is about 20 kilometers away from the community. And besides that, they trade and rely also on energy from Alberta. But this area of the grid is particularly carbon intensive. So most of BC relies on hydropower for power generation, which doesn't have the same carbon intensity. So that's another reason why it's important to look at having a clean energy source, both for long-term energy security, but also for reducing the carbon intensity of that portion of the BC hydro grid. Okay, so I'll jump into some of what's been happening more particularly on the project. So a bit of a closer look at some key progress, some key milestones we've achieved to date. I showed the map originally showing the geothermal exploration permit areas, and those are issued by the Ministry of Energy in BC. Very exciting milestones for Fort Nelson First Nation to receive the first and very recently the second permit area across a exciting geothermal resource opportunity. There's also been significant funding support, a lot of government support, and significant public support for the project, which goes a long way in why we've been able to have the successes we've had. We've also completed the engineering and drilling of the first full-size geothermal production well. So as Kathy mentioned, these wells are much larger and in this case, quite a lot deeper than the surrounding natural gas wells. So that was quite an accomplishment and certainly some lessons learned along the way, but we were able to successfully complete that well. And we also repurposed an existing gas well, which was deepened to serve as the re-injection. So we now have the doublet for the testing. We also have completed a series of engagement sessions and meaningful engagement and employment of the local Indigenous community, Fort Nelson First Nation, and that effort is largely led by the Fort Nelson First Nation community members. So I'll share a bit about them as well. And then lastly, we're currently underway with our geothermal pump test. Our flow rate test is happening as we speak. So it's a very exciting time on the project. And then some challenges today. So these are kind of things that, have had cost, schedule, technical challenges on the project. One is the remoteness of this northern community, and why that's relevant really ties into the next point, which is the oil and gas market conditions. Because we are using a lot of the same services that are typical in the oil and gas market, we are competing with the oil and gas market. And it's an exciting time in that there's a lot of industry activity. However, for us, that means things like securing a service rig or a drilling rig or a whole range of services has been more timely and costly than we anticipated. And it's certainly been a lesson that we are continuing to learn on the project, is just working with and responding to the market conditions that impact our project. And because we're such a remote location and with a relatively small service request at times, there are times when it's just not as appealing to some service providers to come up north to this project. There's also some drilling and operations lessons that we've learned during the drilling and testing stages, and I'll share some more on that, as well as the process of, I'll say, repurposing a natural gas field, but really targeting a geothermal resource below a natural gas field has certainly come with some pros and cons, and I'll highlight those a bit as well. On the permitting side, BC does have a process in place through the Geothermal Resources Act. However, we are the first project to go through the process of converting an exploration permit to a geothermal lease, and that is proving to be complex with various overlapping authorities, and they are collaboratively working with us to understand the process that this will require. But it's certainly, in some ways, we're a bit of a guinea pig of this process, and that's been an ongoing challenge to manage. But I will say that there's a lot of collaborative support from the regulatory agencies in the province. The other aspect is establishing market access, and that's both for the electricity side and the heat side. We're in the process of reviewing market opportunities, and there are certainly promising market opportunities, but securing that access through a sales agreement, both for electricity and heat, is a key challenge on our project. Okay, so a bit of a zoom in here. This is during the well testing operations, or sorry, the drilling operations of the first geothermal well test site, CA87I is what I was referred to, and you'll see it's placed in the boreal forest there, surrounded by the natural gas field, but really in a very beautiful setting, as well as just a very exciting milestone for BC and for this project. Okay, and this is a drilling curve slide, and what it's showing is pretty candidly some of the challenges that occurred during the drilling of this well. And what you'll see is kind of the original estimate showing on the black line here over the days as the measured depth on the Y column there, and then the actual. And this just highlights some of the challenges along the way. And some of these are relatively commonplace, and some of them are unique to the size and the newness of drilling a well like this to the crew and the rig and the service providers provided. This was certainly much bigger than what they'd been encountering before. The other thing that I can highlight on here is, there were some unfortunate challenges with a bit failure and a fishing operation that took some time, as well as high gas content and circulation issues, as well as waiting. So you'll see a few of these are waiting on cementers and waiting on casing bowl supply. And that had to do again with the kind of the market conditions and how difficult it's been to have services and supplies readily available. All that to say, we did get through it and successfully drilled the well. And I think it's just important to share your lessons learned as you go. So this is kind of a picture of how we got there and some of the challenges we encountered along the way. I will say again, this is from Remedy Energy, and they very much took the lead on these operations. Okay, so testing, we are completing the flow testing, which of course is a critical aspect of really confirming your resource, and it's going to form a critical aspect of our resource validation in our overall bankable feasibility study. So we want to be able to show financiers that and the developer that we have really proven out this resource, and a key aspect of that is a test, a 30-day flow test. So initially, we tried to complete this testing shortly after drilling, so in late 2021, and that testing was incomplete. During the testing, we saw some really exciting things. We saw flow rates up to 70 liters per second. We saw some higher temperatures, and we also unfortunately encountered more gas than we expected, and that was really what caused us to have to stop the test. Was the well completion and the ESP were not designed to produce the gas that we were seeing. And this diagram on the right kind of shows what this is, again from Remedy Energy, showing kind of this concept that we believed was happening is we're producing from the Slave Point, as well as below that the Sulphur Point, Cake River, and Chinchaga formations. So historically, the Slave Point has been the source of natural gas production. But over the years, why we were so confident of this geothermal resources, along with gas and the depleting gas resource, they have been seen in producing hot water. And there's a lot of evidence of hot geothermal brine in the Slave Point, and it's one of the more highly productive zones. So we wanted to include that in our geothermal reservoir target. However, whether it's location specific or kind of more widespread across the field, in this case, we were seeing more gas than expected, and we needed to stop the test and reevaluate, re-engineer, and come back in. So we did that this summer, and part of the recompletion actually was extending the liner and isolating out the Slave Point formation. So this was a bit of an interesting challenge to face because we had the most confidence that the Slave Point was productive, but we also knew that there was higher gas content in the Slave Point, and we also had indications that the lower units were a little tighter in terms of permeability and porosity, but also hotter and seemingly productive. So we did make the mitigation of running an isolation liner. So we now have a 7-inch isolation liner that isolates the Slave Point. So the open hole section of the well is across those lower units. And we are testing those lower units. And so far we are thankfully very well on our way of completing the test. We have about 10 days left in our 30-day flow test. And those across the reservoir thickness, we have seen the flow rates we need to achieve. We're achieving those flow rates. The temperature it's slowly rising. We were hoping for, on the bottom here, you'll see kind of this is gross output, power output per well. This is similar to what Kathy had shown, but a bit of a different view, looking at different temperatures, kind of what flow rates you need in order to achieve a certain megawatt of gross electrical output. Anyways, we were hoping to achieve more around 120 degrees. It is looking so far that we're going to achieve more like 115 degrees. Although I will say we ran a injection logging program before we began the testing and some other operations, and significantly cooled the wellbore area. So that has been slowly rising. So we will reach an equilibrium and understand that temperature. The other thing that is continuing is gas production. So my reservoir engineer tells me that gas production is likely free gas pockets that do exist in those lower units. It is manageable. We not only do we isolate the higher gas zone, but we also added a gas separator on the ESP. It is manageable and we can continue the test, but it does prove it is likely that it's going to be a stream. We'll have a hydrocarbon stream that we will need to separate out and either process or utilize or reinject. We're still just understanding what that gas is and really if it's sustainable or if we'll be able to produce it up pretty quickly. We also have a comprehensive sampling program, which is really critical to understand the geochemistry of the brine and the gas that we're seeing, both on the surface and downhole. It's been very informative, and we're working with Fluid IQ and Williamson Integrity Services to understand the both the corrosion and scaling risks that face the project. And so far, things are looking very manageable in that aspect, but we are in the early days of sampling and analysis. So for those lower units, they have proven to be quite productive. This transmissivity permeability thickness number 25,000 millimeters, that's for the entire thickness from the splay point across the lower units. So about half of that exists in the splay point. So this decision of how much of the splay point to produce from or not is still one that we are debating and discussing. If we strictly target those lower units, it's likely we will need deviated or short horizontal sections in the future to achieve the commercial rates we're hoping for of around 100 kilograms per second per well. But we have been very encouraged to see the flow rates that we're achieving so far. At this point, we're pump limited, not reservoir limited on the flow rates that we're achieving. So that's been a positive indication so far. And I'm going to jump back to the surface side. So I'm just going to say, I can't see my clock right now. So if you need me to wrap it up anytime soon, just feel free to prompt me with like a 5-minute warning and I can see through things a little quicker. Anyways, on the surface side, so this is similar to the map I showed you before, but what we're showing is kind of the target development area. So this is mainly, it's the more appealing portion of the reservoir. It's also closer to the community, to the BC interconnection, and it has good road access. But the only actual piece of infrastructure on the Deh-Kah project right now that exists is this well test site highlighted in yellow with the red dot. We plan to use this as a longer term production well. The other future conceptual production and injection wells are shown here, with the red being production, blue being reinjection, as well as a resource gathering system that uses, I believe it's over 90% of existing footprint and existing right-of-ways. This is, again, is all conceptual. We're working through the preliminary stages of optimizing our design. But this RGS will bring the fluid to the power plant location, which is one option we're looking at, is shown on the map here, which will then connect the transmission line shown in green to the BC Hydro grid. There's a whole range of activity on the surface side that needs to be completed to move this conceptual development to a detailed design and also to a permitting process. So we're underway on environmental baseline studies, collecting field data and archaeological overview assessments, working both with professional biologists and archaeologists, as well as the Fort Nelson First Nation Lands Department, who brings the Indigenous and traditional knowledge to that aspect of the work. We're also planning to bring a surface engineering team on board soon onto our team, and we've heard a lot of interest from the industry, so we will be expanding our team because this is the process of optimizing not just the subsurface reservoir engineer design or from a geological perspective, but also certainly on the surface side. We're also looking for a geotechnical engineer to understand the ground conditions. So just a lot of different aspects on the surface side that are underway right now. All right, so that's some of the kind of key technical progress and updates. I'll talk a little bit more about the social impact of a project like this in a northern Indigenous community. So a very significant part of the work we do involves local training and employment initiatives. This is an area that has decades of gas production and very skilled workers in the energy sector and very knowledgeable members of the nation who are able to contribute to this project, and there's the opportunity for reskilling energy sector workers. This is the phase 4 plan. It's an image shown of the updated phase 4 training and employment plan, and this is continually updated. And there's just such wonderful support from a whole wide range of academic institutes and local trades institutes, and coming together with the Deh-Kah team and the Fort Nelson First Nation in developing a proactive training and capacity building plan with the objectives of maximizing local employment, wanting to prioritize long-term job creation, so meaningful employment that leads to longer-term career growth, ensuring that this information is accessible and inclusive in the community, and then again, reskilling oil and gas workers who, I think as Kathy mentioned, there's a lot geothermal can learn from the oil and gas industry in Canada, and there's a lot the industry can learn from the geothermal industry. So trying to bring that together with the local involvement and leadership, really. Right now on phase 4, the Deh-Kah team, so like I mentioned, I work on an integrated project management team with the Barclay Group, and we work very closely with this team of local Indigenous Deh-Kah hires. Jamie here was meant to present with me today, but we also have Taylor Banks-Koza, Andrea Warren, and Kim Diamond-C. And you'll see that the employment is not just technical in nature. For example, Andrea is the media and communications specialist, and that's a very critical part of the project success, as well as Taylor provides community engagement leadership. And Kim is helping us, along with Jamie, in maximizing training employment opportunities. But both Kim and Jamie bring a wealth of experience from oil and gas, and particularly natural gas power plant operations. Community engagement. Again, this is a project owned by a First Nation, so community engagement is a really key part of ensuring the social acceptance of the project, and we're lucky enough to have a Deh-Kah team lead those efforts. So that includes things like working with kids and providing fun, clean energy education. We held the Deh-Kah Career Development Fair, and there's Jamie sharing some of that on the right there. Talking about local other opportunities, which range up to agriculture and a recent celebration, and then just some education for the community and gathering feedback from the community. All right, and then lastly, I'll talk a little bit about value added or geothermal cascading opportunities beyond power generation. I really like the slide that you showed, Kathy, there, but this is another kind of example of showing beyond power generation. So even on the power generation side, we are still evaluating connection to the BC Hydro grid or local industrial opportunities. And then with the direct heating side, there is beyond just power generation, we are planning to use the heat, and that could again be used for industrial purposes or even community heating related purposes. On the industrial side, we're looking at everything from agriculture and greenhouse production. Food security in the north is critically important. It's a very serious issue in northern Canada is access to food and particularly fresh produce. And this is the Fort Nelson communities along the Alaska Highway, which is a corridor to the north in a lot of ways. And so it could be very well positioned to play a key role in food security in the north. It's quite an exciting opportunity. There's also the potential of more recreational ecotourism opportunities. We are looking a little at potential for mineral extraction from the brine and collaboration with academia. So University of Alberta and Victoria and BC all have a collaborative academic research role and interest on the project. And then I'll just end it off with explaining one of the cascading opportunities that's currently underway is a Fort Nelson First Nation agricultural opportunities project. So that's looking at local agricultural opportunities, and that can extend from growing food in a greenhouse to raising livestock to crop growth. And all of this is led by Uplands Consulting in collaboration with the Fort Nelson First Nation, who bring, their own working knowledge of agriculture and the region, and are really leading this aspect of the project, along with experts to understand what's possible. How could we use geothermal to expand on this opportunity in the region? So it's an exciting opportunity beyond power generation, and a very important one being considered on the project. And I think that is everything I have. This is the well site. You'll see the wellhead in the back here. And this is the blasting ceremony. So this is members of the Fort Nelson First Nation, as well as the Barkley group, as well as some other key players on the team. And up front here, we have the chief Dale of the Fort Nelson First Nation. So just a community gathering on the well site. And that is everything I have for you. So thank you. And please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Cassie. It was such an amazing presentation, and this is really a very inspiring project. I don't know if someone has questions for Cass. Comments?
Can I make a comment?
Yes.
Yes, that's awesome. The one thing I want to point out is your test results. So what did you say, 73 liters per second?
So the first round of testing, which we used a bigger ESP, we achieved up to 70 liters per second, but we couldn't sustain it for, as long as we needed to because of gas production.
Yeah. No, it's gas is yeah. I mean, if you were looking for gas, you would be mad because you got too much water.
Yeah, I know, it's funny. But the problem on its head.
But what I want to point out is that so when we design geothermal wells, we actually design them. So Cass did two things. One is they got 70 liters per second, and it was pump limited. So that's exactly what we want. Those are the results that are incredibly exciting, because we want those wells. We design those wells, in fact, to handle 100 liters per second. So in our project, where I said, we want 300 liters per second to produce our 10 megawatts, what we're looking at is 3 producers and 2 injectors. So, the results that they've had in these early days are spectacular. And I also want to comment that that buggy limestone that Cass showed, that dolomitization process, so that does seem to produce incredibly permeable reservoirs. And that's the target throughout the Western Canada Sedimentary Basin. I showed you some of the deeper units in our area because they're hotter. But that buggy dolomite is we think is going to be very important for production. So that was a great photo. Hopefully in a year from now, I can show you everybody similar things. But anyway, that's fantastic. Thank you, Cass.
Thank you so much. Appreciate that.
Yeah, so if anyone from the public has any questions, so I'm going to say that the presentation is being recorded, so it will be available on the Geotheroom platform and also on Geothermal Canada webpage. So you can go back and listen to the presentation. And if you have, further questions for our speakers, maybe you can send them an email with your questions. So thank you so much, Katie and Cass, for your time and for showing us the geothermal developments that are underway in Canada. And this is it.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Mafalda. That was great. And yes, and to all of you, please, I'll put, probably if you can just circulate myself and Cass's emails. be happy to follow up on anything. And also check out our Geothermal Canada webpage. We've got there's great content in there. The members only sections, students, I think it's $25. So strongly encourage you to join us and get access to the members only content. But there is a significant amount of content on the page. So we're on the website. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I will say the Geothermal Canada, the Essential, I think they call it the Essential Lecture Series, has been really great. And, Berkeley is a member, and we have certainly used that resource to share learning across our team, and definitely encourage you guys to check it out.
Thank you, Cass. So it's available as a member.
Yes, and I just gonna add that if I don't know if any students are here, but for the students that will see this presentation after, Geotheroom is online virtual geothermal school. Universidad de Medellin is the host institution, and it was developed by Daniela Blessen. So if you would like to access the contents on the Geotheroom, you have to ask for ID, and you have to fill a Google form, but you can also enter on the UNESCO IGCP 636 webpage, and you will find there all the information that you need to register on Geotheroom and how to access all the contents of the Geothermal Online School. And with this, if there are no further comments, and yeah, Catherine just put her email over there, so in the chat, so you can just take a note. And if there are no further comments, no further questions, I will finish this session. And thank you everyone for your time.
Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Thank you.